Hey, tonight we're diving into the life of a Victorian farm worker in 19th century England. We'll explore what made their lives so challenging, from dawn to dusk labour to the social structures that kept them at the bottom of society. It's a journey through muddy fields, cramped cottages, and a struggle for survival that shaped an era. But before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in rural England in 1837. Queen Victoria has just ascended to the throne at the tender age of 18, and you're a farm labourer in a small village in Suffolk. The first thing you notice is the cold, the bitter, bone-deep cold that seeps through the thin walls of your cottage and makes your breath visible in the grey pre-dawn light. The good news is that you have a roof over your head, a small cottage provided by the farm where you work. The bad news is that it's a 2-up, 2-down dwelling, just 2 rooms downstairs and 2 tiny bedrooms upstairs, and you share it with your wife and 5 children. The walls are damp, the thatched roof leaks when it rains, and the dirt floor turns muddy during wet weather. But it's still better than the workhouse, where the poorest of the poor end up when they have nowhere else to go. You roll out of the lumpy straw mattress you share with your wife and 2 youngest children. The older ones sleep in the other bedroom, crammed together for warmth. Your back aches from yesterday's labour, but there's no time to stretch or ease the pain. The farm waits for no one, especially not a labourer like yourself. Your wife is already up, stoking the small fire in the grate. A thin porridge bubbles in the pot, made from a handful of oatmeal stretched with water. It's not much, but it will have to keep your strength up until midday. You gulp it down quickly, barely tasting the bland mixture, and wash it down with weak tea. There's no sugar. That's a luxury reserved for special occasions. You pull on the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before that. Your trousers are patched in several places, the knees worn thin from kneeling in the fields. Your shirt is rough against your skin, and your jacket, though sturdy, does little to keep out the chill of an English autumn morning. Your boots are your most prized possession, cracked and worn, but still keeping your feet relatively dry as you trudge through the muddy fields. Outside, the sky is just beginning to lighten. The village is quiet, but you can see smoke rising from other cottage chimneys. Your neighbours, other farm labourers, a blacksmith's apprentice, the washerwoman, are also beginning their days. The rhythm of rural life has changed little for centuries, though the conditions have worsened in recent years. As you walk towards the farm, you pass the grand house where the squire lives. He owns most of the land in the parish, including the farm where you work. The windows are still dark. The gentry don't rise at dawn like labourers do. They have servants to light their fires and prepare their breakfast while they sleep in warm beds with proper linens and blankets. The tenant farmer who employs you lives in a substantial farmhouse, not as grand as the squire's mansion, but far more comfortable than your cottage. He rents the land from the squire and makes his living managing it, hiring labourers like you to do the actual work of ploughing, sowing, and harvesting. You arrive at the farm as the sun peeks over the horizon. The farm bailiff, the man who oversees the labourers and reports to the tenant farmer, is already there, barking orders and assigning tasks for the day. He's a hard man, but fair enough. He worked his way up from being a labourer himself, and he knows the work well, even if he sometimes seems to have forgotten the hardship of it. You'll be helping with the threshing today, he tells you, and your heart sinks a little. Threshing is separating the grain from the stalks of wheat or other cereal crops. It's one of the most physically demanding jobs on the farm, involving hours of beating the grain with a flail, a wooden stick attached to a shorter, heavier piece of wood. The flail is swung overhead and brought down on the grain repeatedly, hour after hour, until your arms feel like they might fall off. The good news is that threshing provides employment during the winter months when there's less fieldwork to be done. The bad news is that you've heard rumours of a new machine that can do the work of several men and do it faster. If the farmer decides to buy one, what will happen to you and the other labourers who depend on winter threshing work to feed their families? But for now, there's work to be done. You join the other men in the barn where sheaves of wheat are piled high, waiting to be threshed. The rhythmic sound of flails hitting grain fills the air, accompanied by grunts of effort and an occasional cough as dust fills the enclosed space. Your 10-year-old son joins you mid-morning. He should be in school learning to read and write, but the family needs the extra income he can bring in as a farm boy. Besides, what good would book learning do him? He's destined to follow in your footsteps as a farm labourer, just as you followed in your father's. The boy is set to work scaring birds from the newly sown fields. He'll spend the day running back and forth, shouting and waving his arms to keep the crows and rooks from stealing the precious seed. It's monotonous work, and he'll be cold and tired by day's end, but at least it's not as physically demanding as threshing. Your wife, meanwhile, is at home caring for the younger children while also taking in laundry from wealthier families in the village to earn a few extra pennies. The oldest daughter, just 12, is already in service at the squire's house, working as a scullery maid. Her wages are sent home to help support the family. You miss her, but there was no choice. There are too many mouths to feed on your meagre earnings. By midday, your arms are leaden and your back screams in protest at the repetitive motion of swinging the flail. The bailiff calls a brief break, and the men sit on bales of straw, eating their meagre lunches. Yours is a chunk of bread and a small piece of cheese. No meat? That's for Sundays, if you're lucky. As you eat, the men talk in low voices. There's discontent brewing. Wages have been cut again, and with winter coming, there's fear of not having enough to feed their families. Some have heard of farm workers in Kent breaking threshing machines and demanding higher wages. Others speak of the workhouse with dread. It's the fate that awaits those who can't support themselves. Families separated, forced to work for their keep in conditions little better than prison. You listen but say little. What good would protest do? The squire and the farmers hold all the power, and labourers are easily replaced. There are always more desperate men looking for work, willing to accept whatever wages are offered. After the brief rest, it's back to the relentless rhythm of the flail. Swing, thump, swing, thump. Dust fills your lungs and sweat soaks your shirt despite the chill in the air. Your hands are calloused from years of such work, but they still blister and bleed sometimes during threshing season. The day stretches endlessly. There's no clock to watch. Time is measured by the position of the sun and the growling of your stomach. Finally, as the light begins to fade, the bailiff calls an end to the day's labour. You've earned your daily wage, a sum so small it would shock people living in later centuries, but it's all that stands between your family and destitution. Walking home in the gathering dusk, your body aches with fatigue. You pass the village pub, where some of the men stop to spend a few precious pennies on ale. The temptation to join them is strong, to numb the pain and forget the hardship for a little while, but you resist. Your family needs every penny you can bring home. Your son joins you on the path, his face smudged with dirt, his thin frame shivering slightly in the evening chill. He's too tired to talk much, but you ruffle his hair with affection. He's a good boy, working without complaint, even though he should still be playing like the children of wealthier families. When you reach your cottage, the warmth of the fire greets you, along with the smell of potato soup simmering on the hearth. It's a simple meal: potatoes, a few vegetables from your small garden, and if you're lucky, a small piece of salt pork for flavour. But after a day of hard labour, it tastes like a feast. Your wife looks as tired as you feel. She's been working all day too, washing clothes, caring for the children, tending the small vegetable plot behind the cottage, and perhaps doing some sewing by candlelight to earn a few extra pennies. Her hands are red and chapped from washing in cold water, and her face looks older than her 30 years. After the simple supper, there's little energy for anything but sleep. No books to read. Neither you nor your wife ever learned how, though you hope your children might someday. No music except what you make yourselves, perhaps a simple tune hummed while working, or an old song sung around the fire on winter evenings. Instead, you sit by the dying embers of the fire, perhaps whittling a toy for the youngest child or mending a piece of clothing. Your wife darns socks by the dim light, squinting to see the tiny stitches. The children are already asleep, huddled together for warmth in the small bedrooms above. This is the rhythm of your days as a Victorian farm labourer. Dawn to dusk work, with little reward beyond survival. The seasons dictate your tasks, ploughing in autumn, sowing in spring, haymaking in early summer, harvest in late summer, and threshing in winter. The work is hard, the reward small, but there's a certain dignity in it nonetheless. You're feeding the nation, though few acknowledge your essential role. As you finally climb the narrow stairs to bed, your body protesting every step, you wonder what the future holds. Will your children face the same hardship? Will things ever improve for people like you? The Industrial Revolution is transforming cities, but here in the countryside, life continues, much as it has for generations, though perhaps with less security than in the past. You don't know it yet, but change is coming. The next decades will see agricultural workers begin to organise, demanding better wages and conditions. Mechanisation will transform farming, reducing the need for manual labour, but eventually leading to improved conditions for those who remain. Education will gradually become available to children of all classes, opening new possibilities for your sons and daughters or their children. But for now, as you drift off to sleep beside your wife, your aching body grateful for the brief respite before another day of toil, those changes are still over the horizon. Your world is defined by the rhythm of the seasons, the boundaries of the farm, and the daily struggle to keep your family fed and sheltered. The wind whistles through the gaps in the thatched roof, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots. Tomorrow will bring another day just like this one. Hard work, little reward, but the simple satisfaction of surviving another day in the often harsh world of Victorian rural England. Morning comes all too soon, the pale winter light filtering through the small window of your bedroom. Today brings different work. The hedgerows need maintenance, an essential task for keeping livestock contained and marking the boundaries of fields. It's cold work in December, and your fingers quickly grow numb as you trim and weave the hawthorn branches. Your son works alongside you today, learning the skill that has been passed down through generations. He's a quick learner, his small hands deftly weaving the flexible young branches into the existing hedge. You feel a surge of pride, mingled with a touch of sadness. He should have more options than this, more possibilities than following you into a life of hard labour and constant uncertainty. Will we always be farm workers, Father? He asks, suddenly, as if reading your thoughts. You pause, considering your answer carefully. It's honest work, you tell him. Not everyone can say that. We put food on people's tables across the country, even if they never think about where it comes from or who grew it. He nods, accepting this, but you can see the questions in his eyes. He's heard stories from the carter who sometimes travels to London and returns with tales of grand buildings, busy streets, and jobs that don't involve breaking your back in the fields from dawn to dusk. Things change, lad, you add, surprising yourself with the optimism in your voice. Your granddad never would have believed the changes I've seen in my lifetime. Who knows what might happen in yours? The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of the bailiff, who's come to check on your progress. He nods approvingly at the neat hedgework and moves on without comment. High praise indeed from a man of few words. As the short winter day progresses, you work steadily, breaking only for a brief midday meal. The cold seeps into your bones and your hands grow stiff and painful, but the work must be done. The farm's success depends on countless such tasks, each performed by men and women whose names will never be recorded in history books, but whose labour feeds a nation. The hedge work continues for several days. It's varied by other winter tasks: repairing farm buildings, clearing ditches, maintaining tools, caring for the livestock that need constant attention regardless of the season or weather. Winter on a Victorian farm isn't the rest period that many might imagine. There's always work to be done, though the pace is somewhat less frantic than during the growing and harvesting seasons. One morning, as you're making your way to the farm, you hear excited chatter in the village. A travelling peddler has arrived, bringing news from other parts of the country along with his wares. Such visitors are a welcome break from the routine of village life, offering glimpses of the wider world, and sometimes bringing letters for those fortunate enough to have family members who can write. This peddler has tales of unrest in other farming regions. He speaks of something called the Swing Riots, named after a mythical leader called Captain Swing. Farm workers in Kent, he says, have been breaking threshing machines and demanding higher wages. Some have even set fire to hayricks and farm buildings. You listen with a mixture of fear and fascination. Such actions are dangerous. Men have been hanged or transported to Australia for less, but there's a part of you that understands the desperation that would drive men to such extremes. When your wages barely feed your family, when the introduction of a machine threatens to take away even that meagre income, what choice is left? The peddler moves on, but his tales linger in the village like smoke after a fire. That evening, in hushed voices around cottage hearths, men and women discuss what they've heard. Some are horrified at the lawlessness, others secretly admire the courage of those who are fighting back against a system that keeps them perpetually on the edge of starvation. You keep your opinions to yourself. It's safer that way, but that night, as you lie awake listening to the soft breathing of your family, you wonder what would happen if such unrest spread to your quiet corner of Suffolk. Would you join it, risk everything for the possibility of change? Or would you keep your head down, focus on survival, and hope that somehow, someday, things might improve without such desperate measures? These thoughts follow you into uneasy dreams where threshing machines loom like monsters and faceless men in fine clothes count coins while children cry from hunger. You wake before dawn, as always, to the same reality that has defined your life as a Victorian farm worker. Another day of hard labour awaits, regardless of dreams or distant unrest. But something has shifted, almost imperceptibly. A question has taken root in your mind, one that will grow alongside the crops you tend and harvest. Does it have to be this way? As winter gradually yields to spring, this question continues to sprout and grow, much like the seeds you now sow in the freshly ploughed fields. The rhythm of farm work continues, the eternal cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting that has sustained humanity for thousands of years. But now, as you work, you find yourself looking beyond the boundaries of the fields, wondering about the wider world and your place in it. Spring brings a different kind of labour. The fields must be prepared and sown, an investment in the future that requires faith in the natural order. You guide the plough behind a team of heavy horses, their muscles straining as they pull the implement through the soil. It's skilled work, requiring strength and judgment to cut straight furrows of consistent depth. Years of experience guide your hands, making the difficult task look almost effortless to observers who don't understand the knowledge and strength required. Your son now works in the fields full-time, having reached his 11th birthday. School was never really an option. The family needs his wages too desperately. He follows behind you, scattering seed with practiced movements. His childhood is already behind him, replaced by the responsibilities of contributing to the family's survival. Your wife and daughters are equally busy. Spring means garden planting, cleaning, preserving any remaining winter stores, and preparing for the coming growing season. The family's small vegetable plot is as vital as your wages for keeping everyone fed. Every scrap of land around your cottage is carefully cultivated, producing potatoes, cabbages, onions, and a few herbs that add flavour to otherwise bland meals. As the days lengthen and warm, the pace of work intensifies. There's a brief period of relative plenty as the first spring vegetables become available, supplementing the monotonous winter diet of bread, potatoes, and the occasional piece of bacon. The children's faces lose some of their winter pallor as fresh food and sunshine work their magic. But the spectre of mechanization continues to loom. You've heard that the farmer is considering purchasing a seed drill, a machine that would plant seeds more efficiently than broadcasting by hand. It would mean less work for you and the other laborers during the crucial spring planting season. Every such improvement means less need for human labor, fewer jobs, lower wages, and more families facing destitution. The irony doesn't escape you. The very innovations that make farming more productive, that could, in theory, produce more food for everyone, threaten the livelihoods of those who have traditionally done the work. Progress for some means hardship for others, and you and your fellow farm labourers are invariably on the losing end of these changes. Yet the work continues because it must. The nation needs to be fed, and despite the hardships, there's pride in being part of that essential process. As the spring planting is completed and the first green shoots appear in the fields, there's a sense of accomplishment that transcends the daily struggle. You've participated in the ancient miracle of growth and renewal, playing your part in the cycle that sustains all life. Perhaps that's why, despite everything, you still find moments of joy in the work itself, when the first light of dawn reveals a mist-covered landscape of infinite beauty. When a skylark soars above the fields, its song a celebration of existence. When your son masters a new skill and looks to you with pride shining in his eyes. These moments can't be measured in wages or security, but they're real nonetheless, tiny fragments of grace in a hard life. As spring transitions to early summer, the pace of work shifts again. The growing crops need constant attention, weeding, thinning, protecting from pests and diseases. The days are long now, allowing for extended hours of labour. You're often in the fields from first light until dusk, returning home only when it's too dark to see the weeds among the crop rows. Your pay remains the same, regardless of the longer hours. That's the way of agricultural work. The needs of the crops dictate the schedule, not the convenience of those who tend them. But the summer brings small compensations. Warmer weather means less fuel needed for heating. The garden begins to produce food that supplements your diet, and there's the promise of harvest season ahead, when additional hands are needed, and there's the possibility of earning a little extra. The village has its own rhythm alongside the agricultural calendar. The church marks the passage of time with its festivals and observances. Easter, Rogation Days, Whitsuntide, these offer brief respites from labour and opportunities for community gathering. On Sundays, even the most demanding farmers typically allow their workers time for church attendance, though unspoken expectations make it clear that this is not truly optional. The squire and the better-off farmers occupy the front pews, while labourers like yourself sit at the back, the physical arrangement of the church reflecting the rigid social hierarchy of Victorian England. The vicar preaches patience and acceptance of one's lot in life, assuring his congregation that rewards await the virtuous in heaven, if not on earth. You listen politely, hat in hand, but those seeds of questioning planted during the winter continue to grow in your mind? Is this truly God's intended order, or merely an arrangement that benefits those already privileged by accident of birth? Such thoughts must remain private. Challenging the established order, whether social, economic, or religious, is dangerous for someone in your position. Your family's survival depends on continued employment, and that requires at least the outward appearance of accepting your place in the hierarchy. So, you continue the daily labour, watching the crops grow while your children grow alongside them, all too quickly reaching the age where they too must contribute to the family's survival, rather than enjoying the carefree childhood that is the birthright of wealthier children. Your oldest son is becoming a skilled farm worker in his own right. Your daughter, now 13, sends home a small portion of her wages from domestic service at the squire's house. The younger children will soon follow similar paths, the boys to farm labour, the girls to domestic service, or perhaps work in the dairy if they're fortunate. This is the reality of life for a Victorian farm worker, a constant struggle for survival with little hope of advancement or change. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly unchanging existence, new ideas are beginning to take root. The same industrial revolution that threatens traditional agricultural employment is creating new possibilities. Railways are connecting formerly isolated rural communities to towns and cities. Newspapers, though expensive, occasionally make their way into even humble village pubs, bringing news of a wider world where change seems possible. And in that wider world, people are beginning to question the sort of conditions you and your family endure as natural or necessary. Reformers argue for education for all children, for better housing, for fair wages. Most of these voices come from the cities, from people far removed from the realities of rural life. But their ideas are slowly spreading, carried by travellers, returning soldiers, and the occasional literate labourer who reads aloud to his fellows. These currents of change are still distant, like thunder on the horizon of a summer evening, but they're approaching. The Victorian era, for all its rigid social structures and inequalities, is also a time of transformation. The seeds of change are being sown alongside the wheat and barley in England's fields. As you return home in the gathering dusk of a June evening, tired from a day of weeding sugar beet fields under the hot sun, you find your wife at the cottage door, her face alight with an unusual excitement. Your oldest daughter is home for a rare visit, bringing news that the squire's family is seeking a sturdy boy to work in their stables. It would mean regular meals, a proper uniform, and slightly better wages than farm work for your eldest son. It's a small opportunity, but in your world, such chances are rare and precious. That night, as the family gathers around the table for a simple meal made special by your daughter's presence, there's a sense of possibility in the air. Perhaps things can change, even if only in small, incremental ways. Perhaps the future need not be an exact repetition of the past. With this fragile hope warming your heart like the last embers of the evening fire, you finally rest your weary body, ready for sleep to prepare you for another day of labour in the fields of Victorian England. The future remains uncertain, but tonight, at least, it holds a glimmer of possibility that wasn't there before. The summer days stretch long and golden over the fields of Victorian England. As a farm labourer, these are the days when you earn your keep most visibly. From dawn till dusk, the work is constant, but there's a rhythm to it that becomes almost meditative after years in the fields. June brings haymaking, one of the most crucial and labour-intensive times in the farming calendar. The meadows, left to grow tall since early spring, are ready for cutting. You join a line of men wielding scythes, moving through the grass in a synchronised dance that has changed little since medieval times. The whisper of sharp blades through grass creates a gentle soundtrack to your labour, punctuated by the rhythmic sharpening of the scythes when they grow dull. It's skilled work, requiring strength and precision. Young labourers watch carefully, learning the technique that will eventually become as natural as breathing. A good mower is valued and can command slightly better wages during this crucial season. There's pride in being known as a man who can mow a clean acre in a day, leaving not a stalk standing. The women and children follow behind, turning the cut grass with wooden rakes to ensure it dries evenly in the sun. They work in long lines across the field, their movements as coordinated as the mowers. Your wife and younger children are among them, your family working together as a unit, as most farm families do during the busiest seasons. The days are exhausting, but bring a different kind of satisfaction than the winter work. You're outside under the sky rather than hunched in a barn. The weather is warm, the physical labour generating heat that in winter would be welcome, but now causes sweat to soak your shirt within hours of starting. Regular drinks from earthenware jugs help prevent collapse from the heat, the slightly sour taste of small beer, a low-alcohol brew safer than much of the available water, refreshing parched throats. Haymaking has its own social calendar too. The farmer provides food in the field for workers, a rare occurrence that marks the importance of this harvest. It's simple fare, bread, cheese, perhaps some cold bacon, but eaten outside after hours of physical labour, it tastes like a feast. In good years, when the harvest is bountiful and the weather cooperative, there might even be a haymaker's supper at the end, a celebration of successful completion with food, drink, and perhaps music and dancing. These traditions are ancient, part of the rhythm of rural life that has sustained communities for generations. But you've noticed changes in recent years. The farmer has purchased a mechanical mower drawn by horses, a clattering, efficient machine that can do the work of several men. This year it's used only in the larger fields, but what about next year or the year after? How many mowers will be needed when machines can do the work? Such thoughts cloud the normally festive atmosphere of haymaking. Among the workers, conversation turns often to similar changes happening on farms across the country. Someone's cousin in Kent has lost his position entirely, replaced by a threshing machine. Another has heard of whole families forced to enter the workhouse when farm work dried up, unable to pay rent on their cottages without regular employment. The workhouse looms large in the nightmares of every labouring family. It represents the ultimate failure, the final degradation. Families are separated upon entry, men from women, parents from children. The work is deliberately monotonous and pointless, designed to discourage all but the truly desperate from seeking parish relief. The food is barely adequate for survival, the discipline harsh, the entire system designed to stigmatise poverty as a moral failing rather than a consequence of circumstances largely beyond individual control. It won't happen to us, you assure your wife when she voices her fears after the children are asleep. I've never been without work, and the boys will be earning more as they get older. But the worry lines on her forehead don't ease. She's seen too many families who thought themselves secure reduced to destitution by illness, injury, or simply the changing demands of farm work. As June turns to July, the haymaking is completed, the sweet-smelling dried grass safely stored in towering ricks or in the hayloft above the farm's stables. There's a brief lull in the most intense labour, a breathing space before the cereal harvest begins in earnest. During this time, attention turns to the vegetable crops, weeding, watering during dry spells, protecting against pests and diseases. Your cottage garden requires similar attention. The small plot of land attached to your dwelling is cultivated intensively, every square inch used to grow food for your family. Potatoes form the staple crop, providing more calories per area than any other plant you can grow. Cabbages, onions, beans, and a few herbs share the remaining space. It's your wife who manages this crucial resource, her knowledge of growing and preserving food as essential to the family's survival as your wages. Behind the cottage, in a small sty, a pig grunts contentedly. Keeping a pig is common practice among farm labourers who can manage it. Fed on kitchen scraps, windfall apples, and anything else that would otherwise be wasted, the pig will eventually provide valuable protein in the form of bacon, ham, and sausages. Slaughtering Day, usually in late autumn, is an important event, with neighbours often helping each other to ensure that every part of the animal is used and properly preserved. This self-sufficiency is essential because your wages alone cannot support a family. At 10 shillings a week during the busiest seasons, dropping to 6 or 7 shillings in winter, the income you bring home from farm labour must be supplemented by the food you grow. The game occasionally snared. Illegally, though everyone turns a blind eye if it's just for the pot rather than for sale. And the extra earnings from your wife's laundry work and your children's contributions once they're old enough to hire out. Even with all these sources combined, there's precious little left after the essentials are covered. The rent on your cottage, though lower than town dwellings, still takes a significant portion of your earnings. Food accounts for most of the rest. Clothing is patched and mended until it's beyond repair, then cut down to make garments for younger children or used as rags. New items are rare luxuries, usually acquired at the annual fair or from the travelling peddler who visits the village every few months. Education for your children remains a distant dream. The village has a small school supported by the parish and the local landowners, but attendance costs pennies you can't spare, and more importantly, requires children to be absent from work that brings in essential income or helps with tasks at home. Your oldest children learned their letters at Sunday school, but their writing is rudimentary and reading limited to the simplest texts. It's a source of quiet grief that you cannot provide them with the education that might offer a path to a different life. July brings the first ripening of grain fields, the green giving way to gold as wheat, barley and oats mature under the summer sun. This is the moment when every farmer watches the sky with particular anxiety. A sudden storm can flatten ripening grain or begin the sprouting process while still in the field, potentially destroying the crop that represents the farm's main income for the year. For labourers, the approaching harvest brings both excitement and exhaustion. Harvest time means employment for everyone capable of work, from the smallest child who can glean fallen grain to the oldest men who can still wield a sickle. It means slightly better food provided in the fields, the possibility of a harvest bonus if the yields are good, and the brief prosperity that comes with full employment for the entire community. As August arrives, the harvest begins in earnest. You join the line of workers moving through the golden fields, cutting the grain with sickles in careful, practiced motions. It's precise work. Cut too high and valuable straw is wasted. Cut too low and effort is expended needlessly. The sun beats down mercilessly and backs ache from the constant bending, but no one complains. This is the essential work that will determine whether the community eats well or poorly in the coming year. Behind the cutters come the gatherers, binding the cut stalks into sheaves. Your wife and older daughters are among them, their fingers moving deftly to secure the bundles with twisted straw bands. The younger children follow, gleaning any fallen heads of grain, a traditional right of the poor that allows them to collect what would otherwise be wasted. Even the smallest contribution matters when margins of survival are so thin. The sheaves are stood in stooks, small pyramids of bound grain that allow the crop to dry further in the field before being brought to the farmyard for threshing. The landscape is transformed, the flat fields now dotted with these temporary structures that have marked harvest time for centuries. As in haymaking, you've noticed changes in the harvest process. On larger farms, mechanical reapers are beginning to appear, horse-drawn machines that can cut grain far faster than men with sickles. They're expensive and still imperfect, requiring flat terrain to work effectively, but their presence is a harbinger of changes to come. Each innovation reduces the need for human labour, threatening the already precarious existence of families like yours. Yet the harvest continues as it has for generations, the work too important to allow fear of the future to interfere with immediate necessities. From dawn to dusk, the entire community labours in the fields, returning home only when darkness makes continued work impossible. Children fall asleep at the table, too exhausted even to finish their supper. Adults push through pain and fatigue, knowing that this brief period of intensive work and relatively good pay must sustain them through the leaner times ahead. The weather holds fair, allowing the harvest to proceed without interruption. It's a blessing not always granted. You've experienced harvests when rain caused the grain to sprout in the field, or when early autumn storms flattened crops before they could be gathered. Those years brought hardship to everyone. Reduced income for the farmers meant lower wages and less work for labourers, leading to a winter of near starvation for many families. But this year, the golden grain is safely gathered, the last load brought in with traditional ceremony. The Harvest Home celebration marks the successful completion of this crucial work. The farmer provides food and drink for all who participated, a rare occasion when the rigid social boundaries of Victorian rural society are slightly relaxed. Even the squire might make an appearance, condescending to share a drink with the labourers whose work ultimately supports his comfortable existence. The celebration is welcome, but brief. There's no true rest for agricultural workers, not even after the intensity of harvest. The fields must be cleared, the stubble often burned to return some nutrients to the soil. Ploughing begins almost immediately, preparing the ground for the next cycle of planting. And the harvested grain must be processed. The threshing that separates grain from straw, the winnowing that removes chaff from the valuable kernels. It's during threshing that the impact of mechanization is most keenly felt. Traditional threshing with flails is winter work, providing employment during months when field labour is reduced. The steady rhythm of flails on the threshing floor is the heartbeat of rural communities from November through February. But the introduction of threshing machines threatens this essential source of winter income, completing in days' work that would have occupied men for months. You've heard of resistance to these changes. Tales of the swing riots have reached even your isolated village. Accounts of farm workers in southern counties destroying threshing machines, threatening farmers who adopt them and demanding living wages. The authorities have responded with harsh punishment, hangings and transportation to penal colonies in Australia for those caught destroying property or sending threatening letters. Such desperate actions seem distant from your own experience. Violence goes against your nature and your faith, but as you watch the farmer inspect a new threshing machine at the county agricultural show, you understand the fear that drives men to such extremes. Without winter threshing work, how will your family survive? These concerns are shared around cottage hearths throughout the village. In the pub, the one place where working men can gather and speak somewhat freely, conversation often turns to the changes affecting rural life. Some speak with cautious approval of attempts to form agricultural workers' unions, organisations that might give labourers collective power to negotiate for better wages and conditions. Others are sceptical, pointing out that union membership could lead to dismissal and blacklisting, leaving families in even worse circumstances. Despite these fears, the idea of collective action takes root. A travelling agricultural implement salesman brings news of the Agricultural Labourers' Union forming in Warwickshire under the leadership of Joseph Arch, himself a farm worker who has risen to become an advocate for his fellow labourers. The concept is discussed in hushed tones, with equal measures of hope and trepidation. Autumn deepens, the nights drawing in and the temperature dropping. The harvest is complete, the fields ploughed for next year's crops or left fallow under a covering of frost. Work continues, but its nature changes with the season. Hedges are laid, a skilled task that involves partially cutting through stems, bending them horizontally, and weaving them together to create living fences that contain livestock while providing habitat for birds and small mammals that help control agricultural pests. Drainage ditches are cleared, an essential task in the often wet English climate. Proper drainage can transform marginally productive land into fertile fields, but it requires constant maintenance. It's cold, wet work, standing in muddy ditches, clearing silt and debris, but it provides employment when other farm tasks are reduced. In the farmyard, winter preparations continue. Hay and straw are stacked in precisely built ricks, their tops thatched to protect from rain and snow. Tools are repaired and sharpened, buildings maintained, animals moved to winter quarters. There's always work for those willing and able, though wages drop along with the temperature. At home, similar preparations are underway. The small store of potatoes from your garden is carefully laid in straw in the coolest, darkest part of your cottage. Onions are strung and hung from the ceiling. Apples are wrapped individually and stored in boxes, or sliced and dried for longer preservation. Any surplus vegetables are pickled or stored in salt. The pig, fattened over the summer and autumn, will soon be slaughtered, providing meat that, properly cured, will last through the winter months. Your wife preserves everything possible for the lean times ahead. Jams made from hedgerow berries gathered by the children during late summer are stored in precious glass jars. Wild herbs are dried for both flavouring and medicinal purposes. Mushrooms collected from fields and woodlands are strung on thread and dried above the hearth. Nothing edible is wasted, nothing useful discarded. This careful husbandry of resources passed down through generations of rural women is as essential to survival as your labour in the fields. Winter brings its own hardships and consolations. The work is generally less physically demanding than during the growing season, but also less reliably available. Cold, wet weather makes outdoor labour miserable and sometimes impossible. Illness spreads more easily. When families are confined in small, damp cottages with inadequate ventilation and heating. But winter also brings the community closer together. Long evenings are spent around the hearth, telling stories, singing songs, or simply sitting in companionable silence. Neighbours help each other more during the difficult months, sharing resources, checking on the elderly or ill, combining efforts to make the season more bearable. Christmas offers a brief respite, a day or two when even the most demanding farmers allow their workers time for celebration. The cottage is decorated with evergreens, holly, ivy and pine boughs, bringing colour and life into the home. The Christmas meal is the best of the year, featuring meat and perhaps a simple pudding made with dried fruit saved specifically for this occasion. Gifts are few and homemade. Knitted socks or mittens, a carved wooden toy for the youngest child, perhaps an orange for each person if the year has been particularly good. These simple pleasures, set against the backdrop of daily hardship, take on a special significance. Markers of love and care in a world that often seems indifferent to the struggles of ordinary people. As you sit by the fire on Christmas evening, watching your family in the warm glow of the single candle allowed for this special day, you reflect on the year that's passing. It's been neither better nor worse than most. Hard work, minimal reward, the constant anxiety about whether illness or accident might tip the delicate balance of your existence toward destitution. Yet there are small victories worth celebrating. The children are healthy despite the inadequate diet and cramped living conditions that claim so many young lives in Victorian England. The harvest was good, providing enough work and income to meet basic needs. The cottage roof, patched after last winter's storms, has held against autumn rains. These modest achievements represent success in a world where survival itself requires constant effort and vigilance. Tomorrow will bring a return to the normal rhythm of winter work, whatever tasks the farmer or bailiff assigns accepted without complaint, because refusal means no wages and no wages means hunger. But tonight, in this brief moment of rest and reflection, there's a simple contentment in having endured another year, in keeping your family together and fed, in maintaining dignity despite circumstances that constantly threaten to erode it. Outside, snow begins to fall, muffling the night sounds of the village and transforming the muddy lanes into pristine white pathways. Inside, the fire crackles softly, and your youngest child laughs at something one of the older ones has said. These are the moments that make the struggle worthwhile, that provide the strength to face another day, another season, another year of labour in the fields and forests of Victorian rural England. The snow continues to fall throughout the night, transforming the familiar landscape into something almost magical by morning. The children press their faces to the small frosted window panes, their breath creating brief clear spaces through which they view the white-covered world outside. Even the most ordinary objects, the garden gate, the water pump, the stack of firewood against the cottage wall, are transformed into sculptures of snow and ice. For a brief moment, there's the simple joy of beauty in a life that offers few aesthetic pleasures, but practicality quickly reasserts itself. Snow means difficult travel to the farm, wet feet from inadequate boots, increased cold in a cottage already hard to heat. It means potentially lost work days if the weather becomes too severe, and lost work days mean lost wages that your family can ill afford. Still, there's a certain peace in the snow-covered landscape as you make your way to the farm. The usual sounds are muffled, creating a rare quiet in a world normally filled with the noises of labour and livestock. Your breath clouds in the frigid air, and your feet crunch rhythmically through the fresh snow, creating your own temporary path that will soon be covered by new snowfall. Winter work awaits, as it always does. The cycle continues, each season bringing its own labours and rewards, its hardships and small pleasures. And through it all you endure, finding strength in the knowledge that your work, however humble and unrecognised, helps feed a nation and sustains the family that gives meaning to your existence as a Victorian farm worker. As January settles in with its bitter winds and iron-hard frosts, life for a Victorian farm worker becomes a daily battle against the elements. The work doesn't stop for winter, it merely changes form. The fields may be dormant under their blanket of snow and frost, but the farm's needs continue unabated. In the barn, you and several other men are threshing grain by hand. The rhythmic swish and thump of the flails creates a hypnotic soundtrack as you separate the valuable grain from its husks. The work is repetitive and physically demanding, but it provides essential winter employment. This is the good news. The bad news is that you've heard rumours the farmer is considering purchasing a threshing machine like the ones being adopted on larger farms across the country. Such machines can do the work of a dozen men, completing in days what would normally occupy weeks of labour. For the farmer, it's a matter of efficiency and economics. For you and your fellow labourers, it's a direct threat to your ability to feed your families through the lean winter months. This tension between agricultural improvement and the human cost of progress defines the Victorian era in rural England. The threshing barn is at least sheltered from the worst of the weather. Others are not so fortunate. Through the open barn door, you can see men working in the home wood, felling trees for timber and firewood. They work in snow and freezing temperatures, their hands cracked and bleeding from cold and rough work. Each evening they return to the village with bundles of sticks, their perquisite or customary right to gather fallen wood for their own fires, a small compensation for labour that barely pays enough to sustain life. The social hierarchy of rural Victorian England is visible even in these working conditions. The bailiff, who assigns tasks and oversees the labourers, stays mostly in the relative warmth of the barn or the farm buildings. The tenant farmer makes only occasional appearances, checking progress before returning to his comfortable farmhouse. The squire, who owns the land that all depend upon, is barely seen during winter months, perhaps glimpsed in his carriage on the way to neighbouring estates for social visits. This rigid structure governs every aspect of rural life. At the top, the landed gentry who own vast estates, often living off rents while contributing little direct labour. Below them, the tenant farmers who rent land and employ workers. Then come the farm bailiffs and skilled farm workers like shepherds or cattlemen who earn slightly better wages and enjoy marginally better security. At the bottom of the rural hierarchy are the general agricultural labourers like yourself, the largest group numerically, but with the least power, security or comfort. The Church reinforces this order, preaching acceptance of one's station in life as divinely ordained. The vicar, usually educated at Oxford or Cambridge and often related to the gentry, delivers sermons that emphasise duty, obedience, and the rewards that await the virtuous poor in heaven, if not on earth. The squire sits in the front pew, the farmers behind him, and labourers at the back of the church, the physical arrangement mirroring the social order. But beneath this seemingly unchangeable structure, discontent simmers. In the pub after church, when tongues are loosened by ale, men speak of changes happening elsewhere. A travelling peddler has brought newspapers that speak of the Tolpuddle martyrs, agricultural labourers from Dorset who were transported to Australia for forming a friendly society to protect their wages. Their harsh punishment has paradoxically brought attention to the plight of farm workers, and support for their cause is growing in some quarters. These discussions must be conducted carefully. The publican is cautious about allowing talk that might be deemed seditious. His licence depends on maintaining order and respectability in his establishment. The local constable occasionally stops by, his presence silencing conversation until he leaves. In a small community where everyone depends on the goodwill of those higher in the social order, open dissent is risky. Yet the ideas spread nonetheless, carried from village to village by tradesmen, postal workers, and the increasingly mobile population created by the expanding railway network. Words like union and collective bargaining enter the vocabulary of even isolated rural communities. The notion that agricultural workers might organise to demand better wages and conditions, following the example of industrial workers in the cities, takes root even in the conservative soil of the countryside. Your own feelings about such matters are complicated. The idea of fair wages appeals strongly. Your current earnings barely keep your family fed and sheltered, but the risks of involvement in any kind of labour organisation are substantial. Farm workers who agitate for better conditions are easily dismissed, their tied cottages reclaimed, their names added to informal blacklists that prevent them finding work elsewhere in the district. With 6 children depending on your wages, such risks seem almost unthinkable. The spectre of the workhouse looms large in the calculations of every labouring family. The New Poor Law of 1834 has made parish relief even more punitive than before, deliberately creating conditions so harsh that only the truly desperate would seek assistance. Families who enter the workhouse are separated, men from women, parents from children. The food is minimal, the work deliberately monotonous, the discipline harsh and unforgiving. Your village has its own small workhouse, a grim stone building at the edge of the parish. You pass it on your way to the fields each morning, averting your eyes from its blank windows as if the misfortune of its inmates might somehow be contagious. Among the current residents are the widow and children of a man who once worked alongside you, killed in a farm accident last harvest time. With no compensation for his death and no male wage earner, they had nowhere else to turn. The children, once playmates with your own, now wear the uniform of the workhouse poor and are rarely seen in the village. This is the reality that keeps you working through illness and injury, accepting wages that barely support life, and enduring conditions that wear bodies out long before their natural span. The alternative is too terrible to contemplate. Mid-January brings the annual hiring fair in the nearest market town. These fairs, held in market squares throughout rural England, are where farm servants are traditionally hired for the coming year. Unlike day labourers who are employed on a casual basis, farm servants are contracted annually, living in the farmhouse or in accommodations provided by the farmer, receiving board and lodging along with modest wages. Your oldest son, now 14, is ready to enter service. It's a step up from casual labour, offering more security even if the conditions can be harsh. Long hours, strict discipline and little freedom, but it means one less mouth to feed at home and the possibility of learning skills that might lead to better employment in the future. The fair is a colourful, noisy affair despite the winter weather. Potential employers walk among the lines of men, women and children seeking positions, assessing strength, health and capability with the same calculating eye they would use for livestock. Young men seeking work as ploughmen or carters wear pieces of whipcord in their hatbands. Dairymaids wear wisps of straw. Shepherds carry their crooks, traditional signals of their specialised skills. Your son stands nervously among a group of boys his age, straightening to his full height whenever a farmer approaches, trying to look strong and capable despite his slight frame. You watch from a distance, heart aching at this visible symbol of childhood's end, but knowing it's the way of your world. Your own father watched you similarly at a hiring fair nearly 20 years ago. After several tense hours, a prosperous-looking farmer from a neighbouring parish agrees to take the boy on as a yard boy, with the possibility of training as a shepherd's assistant if he proves capable and hard-working. The terms are negotiated briefly: board, lodging, a small cash wage paid quarterly, and 2 sets of clothes per year. A handshake seals the agreement. And just like that, your son has entered the adult world of contracted labour. It's a bittersweet moment. Pride in his first step toward independence mingles with sorrow at his departure from the family home. But there's also relief. His wages, though small, will be sent home to help support his siblings, and there's one less person to feed from your own meagre earnings. Such calculations are necessary in a world where the margin between survival and destitution is razor thin. The hiring fair serves another purpose beyond its practical function. It's a rare opportunity for agricultural workers from different villages to meet and share information. News and rumours circulate about which farmers pay fairly, which are harsh taskmasters, where machines are replacing human labour, and where work might still be found. It's also where you hear more about the nascent agricultural workers' unions forming in some parts of the country. A group of men from a village 20 miles away speak of meetings held in barns by lamplight, of subscriptions of a penny a week contributed toward a fund to support workers who are dismissed for union activity. They describe a local union secretary, a former farm worker who can read and write, who records grievances and communicates with the National Agricultural Labourers Union headquartered in Leamington Spa. You listen with a mixture of hope and scepticism. The idea of farm workers having a collective voice is appealing, but the practical challenges seem insurmountable. How can men who earn barely enough to survive contribute even pennies to a union fund? How can workers living in tied cottages risk the displeasure of their employers? And in a countryside where alternative employment is scarce, what leverage do agricultural labourers really have? Yet the men speak with conviction, describing small victories, a shilling increase in weekly wages here, improved cottage conditions there, the reinstatement of a worker unfairly dismissed elsewhere. Perhaps change is possible even in the seemingly immutable social landscape of rural Victorian England. These thoughts occupy your mind as you return home from the fair, your son walking beside you for what will be one of the last times before he moves to his new position at the upcoming quarter day. The winter sun sets early, casting long shadows across the frost-covered fields. The bitter wind carries the scent of wood smoke from cottage chimneys, the only warmth many labouring families can afford in these cold months. Your cottage comes into view, small and humble, but a haven nonetheless. Smoke rises from its chimney, promising at least minimal warmth within. Your wife stands at the door, watching for your return, the younger children clustered around her. This ultimately is what all your labour serves: the protection and sustenance of these lives entrusted to your care. Whatever risks or sacrifices might be demanded in the struggle for better conditions, they must be weighed against this fundamental responsibility. The next weeks pass in the rhythm of winter work. Threshing continues in the barn, interrupted by days of hedging and ditching when weather permits. The cold seems to penetrate every layer of clothing, numbing fingers and toes until they ache with the pain of returning circulation when you finally return home to the fire. Your son departs for his new position, his few possessions wrapped in a bundle, his face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The younger children cry at his departure, not fully understanding why their brother must leave. You and your wife maintain cheerful expressions until he's out of sight, then share a moment of silent grief for this necessary separation. Farm service is not like factory work or mining. He'll be allowed home occasionally, particularly at harvest when every hand is needed, but these visits will be brief and increasingly rare as he establishes his adult life. February brings slightly longer days but often harsher weather. Snow falls heavily, blocking roads and isolating the village temporarily. Work becomes more sporadic as outdoor tasks become impossible. Days without work mean days without pay, stretching already thin resources to breaking point. The small store of preserved food from autumn begins to dwindle alarmingly. Meals become even more austere. Thin porridge, potatoes, bread if there's flour to be had. It's during these lean times that the community's informal support networks become most vital. Neighbours check on each other, sharing what little they have when one family faces particular hardship. The farmer's wife sends soup to a cottage where children are ill. The blacksmith repairs a broken tool without charge for a man whose wife has just given birth. The village operates on a complex system of reciprocal obligations and assistance that helps mitigate the harshest effects of poverty. The church also plays a role in this support network, though its charity often comes with moral strictures attached. The vicar's wife distributes blankets and clothing to deserving poor families, those who attend church regularly and demonstrate appropriate gratitude and deference. The parish operates a small coal club, allowing members to save pennies throughout the year toward winter fuel. None of these measures address the fundamental inequalities of rural society, but they help blunt the sharpest edges of deprivation. As February gives way to March, the first tentative signs of spring appear. Snowdrops push through the frozen ground, followed by early crocuses. The dawn chorus of birds grows louder and more varied. The light strengthens and lengthens noticeably each day. Nature's cycle of renewal begins again, bringing with it both hope and increased labour. Spring ploughing commences as soon as the ground is workable. Teams of heavy horses draw iron ploughs across fields that have rested through winter. It's exhausting work guiding the plough through heavy soil, maintaining the straight furrows that are a ploughman's pride. But there's satisfaction in it too, the clean smell of newly turned earth, the knowledge that this labour is the first step toward the next harvest, the continuation of the ancient partnership between humans and the land that sustains them. You're fortunate to be skilled with horses, a knack that ensures you're chosen for ploughing rather than the even more physically demanding work of breaking up clods by hand that follows the plough. The massive Suffolk punches that pull the plough respond to your voice commands, and gentle guidance. Their enormous strength harnessed to human purpose through mutual understanding developed over years of working together. The The skill is one you hope to pass to your younger sons, an inheritance more valuable than any material possession you could provide. In a world where formal education remains largely inaccessible to labouring families, such practical knowledge represents both livelihood and identity, connecting generations through shared work practices. As the soil warms, sowing begins. First the spring grains, then vegetables and root crops. The work is constant but varied, each crop requiring specific knowledge about soil conditions, timing, spacing and care. This agricultural calendar has governed rural life for centuries, though the specific crops and techniques evolve with new discoveries and changing market demands. With spring's arrival comes news that generates intense discussion in the village. A representative of the Agricultural Labourers' Union has been speaking at meetings in neighbouring parishes, encouraging workers to join together for better wages and conditions. The movement is growing, with thousands of members across southern England and the Midlands. Their demand is simple and powerful: a minimum wage of 2 shillings and 6 pence per day for agricultural labourers. To labouring families existing on 10 shillings a week or less, such wages seem almost impossibly generous. They would mean meat on the table more than once a week, shoes that keep out water, blankets enough for warmth in winter, perhaps even the possibility of keeping children in school long enough to gain real literacy and numeracy. But the path to such improvements is fraught with risk. Farmers and landowners are vehemently opposed to the union, viewing it as a threat to their authority and profit margins. Workers who join may find themselves summarily dismissed, their tied cottages reclaimed, their names circulated among local employers as troublemakers not to be hired. Despite these dangers, the idea takes hold. Secret meetings are held in barns and back rooms of pubs. Subscription lists circulate, with men pledging pennies from wages that can scarcely stretch to cover essentials. The shared grievances of generations find voice in this new collective expression. You attend one such meeting, listening carefully as a union organiser, himself a former farm worker with a natural gift for persuasive speech, outlines the potential benefits of organisation. He speaks of successful negotiations in other districts, of the power of solidarity, of the fundamental justice of demanding fair compensation for essential labour. The arguments are compelling, but the risks remain substantial. Your family depends entirely on your continued employment. The cottage where they shelter is tied to your job. Lose one, lose both. And in a rural economy with limited alternative employment, dismissal could mean destitution. Yet doing nothing also carries risks. Mechanisation continues to reduce the need for agricultural labour. Wages remain inadequate for family survival, without supplementary income from wives and children. Housing conditions in many labourer cottages are deplorable, contributing to illness and early death. The status quo offers only the certainty of continued hardship. As spring moves towards summer, these discussions continue throughout the rural workforce. The union movement grows despite opposition, gaining members, establishing branch organisations in villages, beginning to flex its collective muscle in negotiations with farmers. It represents something new in the countryside, the awakening political consciousness of a group that has traditionally been voiceless in public affairs. For you and your family, daily life continues amid these larger currents of change. The vegetable garden requires attention after winter's neglect. The cottage needs repairs to damage caused by winter storms. The younger children still at home need shoes, clothes, food that you struggle to provide. Your wife works increasingly long hours taking in laundry to supplement your wages, her hands raw and cracked from harsh soap and cold water. But there's also the simple, profound pleasure of spring's renewal. The first fresh vegetables from the garden taste incredibly sweet after winter's preserved fare. The lengthening evenings allow for walks in the countryside after the day's labour is complete. The blossom on fruit trees promises autumn abundance. These small joys sustain the spirit through hardship that might otherwise seem unbearable. And beneath the surface of continuing daily routine, something is shifting in the consciousness of agricultural workers. The deference and resignation that have characterized rural labor relations for generations are giving way to a tentative assertion of worth and rights. The change is small and fragile, threatened by the enormous power differential between laborers and those who employ them. But it has begun, a quiet revolution in a corner of Victorian society long resigned to immutable hierarchy. Summer approaches, bringing its own labours and rhythms, its promise of harvest and its demands on every member of the rural community. The cycle continues, ancient in its essentials but changing subtly as new ideas, technologies and social arrangements evolve. For agricultural labourers like yourself, caught between tradition and transformation, the future remains uncertain but no longer seems entirely predetermined. As you work in the newly ploughed and planted fields under the strengthening spring sun, you find yourself contemplating possibilities that would have seemed unimaginable to your father's generation. Perhaps your younger children might receive more education than you did. Perhaps wages might improve enough to allow a slightly more comfortable life. Perhaps the value of agricultural labour might finally receive appropriate recognition and reward. These thoughts don't diminish the effort required for each day's work, but they provide a context that makes the labour more than mere survival. You are participating, however modestly, in changes that might eventually transform the harsh conditions of rural working life. Not just for your own family, but for generations to come. It's a legacy more significant than any material inheritance you could possibly provide. The warmth of summer spreads across the English countryside, bringing long days of intense labour, but also a certain abundance unknown in other seasons. As a Victorian farm worker, you've learned to appreciate these months of relative plenty, even as your body aches from dawn to dusk toil under the hot sun. June brings haymaking once again, that crucial harvest that will feed livestock through the coming winter. You join the line of mowers, your scythe swinging in rhythm with the men beside you. The meadow grass falls in neat swathes, the sweet smell rising around you as you work. But this year, there's a difference. In the largest meadow, the farmer has brought in a mechanical mower, a horse-drawn contraption of iron and steel that cuts the grass with spinning blades. The good news is that the machine is still experimental, used only in the flattest field where there are no obstacles to navigate. The farmer watches it carefully, assessing its efficiency against the traditional methods still being used in the other meadows. The bad news is that the machine does the work of several men, and does it faster. If it proves successful, how many mowers will be needed next summer? This question hangs over the haymaking, tempering the usual camaraderie of shared seasonal labour. The men discuss it in low voices during brief rest periods, opinions divided. Younger workers show cautious interest in the new technology, some even volunteering to learn to operate the machine when the farmer offers the opportunity. Older men, whose bodies bear the marks of decades swinging scythes, view the mechanical intruder with undisguised hostility. "That thing takes bread from our children's mouths," mutters old Tom, who has mowed these same meadows for 40 years. His gnarled hands grip his scythe handle with the casual confidence born of countless harvests. What becomes of men like us when iron and steel do all the work? It's a question without easy answers. The march of mechanization seems unstoppable, each year bringing new devices to replace human labor on farms across England. Steam engines power threshing machines that do the work of a dozen flail-wielding men. Mechanical seed drills plant with precision that hand broadcasting can't match. Reaping machines begin to appear in grain fields, their clattering presence a harbinger of change that simultaneously promises promises progress and threatens livelihoods. You find yourself caught between conflicting emotions as you watch the mechanical mower at work. There's a genuine admiration for human ingenuity, for the clever design that translates horsepower into efficient cutting action. But there's also the cold fear in your stomach as you calculate how many fewer labourers might be needed if such machines become common. These thoughts follow you home from the fields each evening, where your family's daily life continues in its established patterns. Your wife and daughters tend the vegetable garden that supplements your wages with essential food. The younger children collect wood for the fire, fetch water from the village pump, help with endless household chores. Your oldest daughter is now in service like her brother, working as a scullery maid in a merchant's house in the nearby market town. Her wages, meagre though they are, provide another slender thread in the web of income that keeps the family from destitution. Keeping body and soul together requires this constant patchwork of earnings, labour, and careful management of resources. Your agricultural wages alone, still hovering around 12 shillings a week in summer, dropping to as low as 6 shillings in winter, cannot support a family. Everyone must contribute. Children working as soon as they're able, your wife taking in laundry or doing piecework sewing, you yourself taking additional jobs beyond your regular farm labour when they're available. Yet, despite the relentless pressure of making ends meet, there are moments of simple joy in these summer days. The children return from the hedgerows with handfuls of wild strawberries, tiny but intensely flavourful. Your wife makes a special treat of them, served with a splash of precious cream skimmed from the milk jug. The first new potatoes from your garden plot taste like nothing else, their delicate flavour needing only a sprinkle of salt and perhaps a pat of butter to become a feast by your standards. These small pleasures take on heightened significance against the backdrop of usual deprivation. A life defined largely by what you lack makes the occasional abundance all the more precious. It's a lesson passed down through generations of rural poor. This ability to find cause for celebration in what wealthier folks might consider trivialities. The hay harvest is completed successfully, the dried grass safely stored in towering ricks or in barns for winter feed. There's a brief lull in the most intense farm work before the grain harvest begins, a breathing space of perhaps 2 weeks when attention turns to other tasks. Weeding root crops, maintaining tools and equipment, repairing fences and buildings damaged during winter and spring. During this interlude, news comes to the village that sends ripples of excitement and apprehension through the community of agricultural workers. The local branch of the Agricultural Labourers Union has called for a meeting at the Crown Inn in the market town with the union's founder, Joseph Arch, himself scheduled to speak. It's a rare opportunity to hear from the man who has become the voice of rural labourers across England, who has dared to challenge the seemingly immutable power structures of the countryside. The decision whether to attend is not simple. Union activities are viewed with deep suspicion by landowners and farmers. Participation could mark a man as a troublemaker, potentially jeopardising his employment and housing. But the promise of hearing Arch, of being part of something that might actually improve conditions for farm workers, proves irresistible to many. You join a group of men from your village walking the 5 miles to town on the appointed evening. There's safety in numbers and a shared sense of embarking on something significant. The conversation along the way is animated but carefully circumspect when you pass other travellers on the road. Old habits of caution die hard in a world where expressing the wrong opinions to the wrong ears can have serious consequences. The Crown's largest room is packed to overflowing when you arrive. Men from villages across the district have come, some walking 10 miles or more after a full day's labour in the fields. The air is thick with pipe smoke and the smell of bodies that work hard in all weathers. A makeshift platform has been erected at one end of the room, and after some preliminary remarks from local union organisers, Joseph Arch himself steps forward. He's not what you expected. A stocky, plainly dressed man in his 50s, he looks more like a prosperous farmer than a firebrand labor leader. But when he begins to speak, his power becomes immediately apparent. His voice carries clearly to every corner of the crowded room, his words chosen for maximum impact with his audience of working men. Arch speaks from experience, having worked as an agricultural labourer from childhood. He understands the hardships, the injustices, the daily struggles that define rural working-class life, but he also offers something many of his listeners have rarely encountered: hope for meaningful change. The union, he explains, provides collective strength where individual workers have none. Together, agricultural labourers can negotiate for better wages, improved housing, more secure employment conditions. No man among you can stand alone against the power of landowners and farmers, he declares, his voice rising with conviction. But 10,000 men standing together, demanding nothing more than fair treatment and wages that keep their children from hunger. That is a force that cannot be ignored or dismissed. The room erupts in cheers and applause. Men who have spent their lives deferring to social superiors, carefully guarding their tongues for fear of repercussions, find their voices in this rare moment of solidarity and validation. The emotion is palpable, a current of energy that sweeps through the crowded room and momentarily transcends the bone-deep fatigue carried by men who have already completed a full day's physical labour. Arch continues, outlining specific goals and strategies. The union seeks a minimum wage of 16 shillings per week, a figure that would transform the lives of families currently subsisting on 10 shillings or less. It demands better housing conditions, an end to arbitrary dismissals, the right to education for labourers' children. These are modest aims by urban standards, but revolutionary in the context of rural power relations that have changed little since feudal times. As the meeting concludes, union representatives distribute membership forms. The subscription is set at 2p per week, a sum that represents a genuine sacrifice for men living perpetually on the edge of subsistence, but one that many present are willing to make. You consider carefully, weighing the potential benefits against the very real risks before adding your name to the growing list of members. The walk home in the gathering dusk is quieter than the journey out, each man absorbed in contemplation of the evening's events and their possible consequences. The excitement of shared purpose mingles with anxiety about potential repercussions. By joining the union, you've taken a step that would have been unthinkable to your father or grandfather, challenging a social order that has defined rural life for centuries. Back at the cottage, your wife waits up despite the late hour, concerned about your unusual absence. You explain about the meeting, the union, your decision to join. Her initial reaction is fear of lost employment, of eviction from the tied cottage, of the workhouse that looms as the final destination for families without resources. But as you elaborate on Arch's vision of fair wages and better conditions, her expression gradually shifts from anxiety to cautious hope. "Do you truly think it possible?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking the question too loudly might prevent its positive answer. "Could things really change for people like us?" "I don't know," you admit, "but for the first time, I believe it might be worth trying." This conversation, replicated in cottages across the countryside, represents a profound shift in rural consciousness. Agricultural labourers, historically among the most deferential and politically inactive sectors of English society, are beginning to conceptualise themselves as having rights and interests distinct from those who employ them. It's a transformation that parallels similar awakenings among industrial workers, though delayed and shaped by the particular conditions of rural life. The following days bring no immediate repercussions for your union membership. Work continues as usual, the constant round of agricultural tasks dictated by season and weather rather than human preference. As summer reaches its height, the grain harvest approaches, that crucial period when the year's main crop must be safely gathered to secure both the farm's income and the nation's food supply. Harvest time has always represented a temporary shift in the power dynamics of rural labour. The urgent need to gather crops before weather damages them creates a brief period when workers' labour is at a premium. Farmers who might drive hard bargains the rest of the year become slightly more generous, knowing that a successful harvest depends on having sufficient hands available at precisely the right moment. This year, that dynamic is complicated by the growing union presence in the district. The local branch has negotiated harvest wages slightly higher than the previous year, leveraging the collective power of workers who might otherwise compete against each other for employment. It's a small victory, but significant as a demonstration of what organisation might achieve. The harvest proceeds under a blazing August sun. You join the line of reapers moving through the golden wheat fields, your sickle flashing as it cuts through the ripe stalks. It's exhausting work, bent nearly double hour after hour in the heat, but there's satisfaction in the visible progress across the field, in the growing stooks of bound grain standing like sentinels behind the advancing line of workers. As in haymaking, mechanization casts its shadow over the traditional methods. The farmer has invested in a mechanical reaper for use in his largest, flattest fields. The horse-drawn machine cuts the grain and drops it in neat piles, requiring only men to follow behind and bind the sheaves. It does the work of multiple hand reapers, its metal arms tireless in the summer heat. Yet there are limitations to the new technology. The machine struggles on slopes, works poorly when the grain has been flattened by rain or wind, and cannot match the adaptability of human harvesters who adjust their technique to varying crop conditions. For now, at least, there remains substantial need for traditional skills alongside the new methods. The intensity of harvest work is offset by harvest traditions that temporarily blur the rigid social boundaries of rural society. The farmer provides food and drink in the field, bread, cheese, cold meat and beer, served to all workers regardless of status. When the last load is brought in, there's a harvest home celebration with a substantial meal, music and dancing continuing into the evening. Even the squire makes an appearance, condescending to share a drink with the labourers, whose work ultimately supports his comfortable existence. These traditions, with their momentary relaxation of social hierarchies, perform important functions in rural communities. They provide rare moments of abundance in lives defined largely by scarcity. They reinforce connections between different social classes who depend upon each other despite vast differences in power and resources. They offer symbolic recognition of the essential nature of agricultural labour, a brief acknowledgement of its value to the broader society. But beneath the surface conviviality, fundamental tensions remain unresolved. The union's growing presence has introduced a new vocabulary of rights and interests into rural discourse, challenging the paternalistic relationships that have historically governed agricultural employment. Farmers and landowners respond with a mixture of concession and resistance, sometimes improving wages or conditions to forestall greater demands, sometimes taking harsh measures against union activists. For you and your family, the immediate impact of these larger social currents is modest but real. The slightly increased harvest wages mean meat on the table more frequently, new boots for the younger children before winter arrives, a small sum set aside for the inevitable lean times ahead. More significant, perhaps, is the subtle shift in self-perception that comes with union membership, a growing sense that deference and acceptance need not be the only responses to hardship and inequality. As summer wanes and autumn approaches, the harvest is safely gathered. The fields stubble now where grain once waved in the breeze. The land is prepared for the next cycle of planting, the eternal rhythm of agriculture continuing despite the social and technological changes swirling around it. Ploughs turn the soil once again, some still guided by human hands behind teams of horses, others now steam-powered machines requiring less direct human control. At home, the family similarly prepares for the changing season. The vegetable garden yields its last crops, the surplus carefully preserved for winter use. The pig, fattened over summer months, will soon be slaughtered, providing meat that, properly cured, will last through the lean months ahead. Firewood is gathered and stacked, extra blankets brought down from storage, gaps in the cottage walls stuffed with rags or clay to keep out winter drafts. Your oldest son returns briefly from his position in farm service, bringing his quarterly wages, most of which he dutifully hands over to help support the family. He's changed in the months since he left home. Taller, more confident, his hands now as calloused as your own from daily labour. There's a melancholy pleasure in seeing him develop into a capable young man, tinged with regret that his path seems destined to mirror your own, with all its hardships and limitations. Yet, even here, there are hints of change. The son speaks of evening classes offered in the nearby town where young working men can learn reading, writing, and basic arithmetic for a penny a week. He's considering attending, recognizing that literacy might open doors closed to those lacking formal education. It's a small act of aspiration that would have seemed almost incomprehensible to previous generations of agricultural labourers for whom education was an unattainable luxury. This modest ambition reflects broader currents of change in Victorian society. The Education Act of 1870 has established the principle of education for all children, though implementation remains patchy, particularly in rural areas where child labour is economically essential to poor families. Mechanics institutes and similar organisations offer educational opportunities to working men, recognising that a modern industrial nation requires a more literate and numerate workforce than previous eras. For agricultural communities, these changes arrive more slowly than in urban centres, filtered through the conservative lens of rural tradition and constrained by the economic realities of farm labour. Yet they arrive nonetheless, carried by railways that increasingly connect remote villages to market towns and cities, by newspapers that find their way even into humble rural pubs, by returning soldiers who have glimpsed wider horizons, by union organisers who link local grievances to national movements for social reform. As autumn deepens toward winter, these broader social currents continue to ripple through your community, intersecting with the more immediate concerns of seasonal labour, adequate food, warm clothing, and dry shelter. The union branch meets monthly now, discussing not only wages and working conditions, but also housing, education, and the possibility of cooperative purchasing to reduce the cost of necessities. You attend when work allows, still cautious but increasingly engaged with these new possibilities. Your wife, initially skeptical, now occasionally accompanies you, joining other farmers' wives in discussions about how to stretch meagre resources further, how to ensure children receive at least basic education, how to support families when illness or injury prevents the main wage earner from working. These meetings, held in the back room of the Crown Inn or sometimes in a supportive farmer's barn, represent something new in rural life, the tentative emergence of working-class consciousness and organisation among a population historically characterised by deference and fatalism. They are small local manifestations of much larger social movements reshaping Victorian Britain, challenging traditional hierarchies and demanding more equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. For you personally, participation brings both risk and reward. There's the ever-present danger of being labelled a troublemaker, potentially losing employment or housing, but there's also a growing sense of dignity, of agency, of being more than merely a pair of hands to be hired and dismissed at the convenience of those with greater economic power. As the days shorten and the first frosts silver the morning fields, you continue your daily labour, still bound by the seasonal imperatives of agriculture and the economic necessities of supporting your family. But something has changed, subtly but significantly, in how you understand your place in the social order. The change is not dramatic or revolutionary. You still touch your cap to the squire when your paths cross, still accept the farmer's orders without overt question, still work from dawn to dusk for wages that barely support life. Yet beneath these continuities, a new consciousness is taking root, not just in you, but in agricultural workers across the country. It's the recognition that the existing order, for all its seeming permanence, is neither natural nor unchangeable, that collective action might achieve what individual effort cannot, that even those at the bottom of the social hierarchy have legitimate interests and rights worth defending. This awakening, tentative and fragile though it remains, is perhaps the most significant harvest of this particular season in your life as a Victorian farm worker. As winter approaches once again, bringing its own hardships and challenges, you carry this new awareness like a seed planted in fertile soil, awaiting the conditions that will allow it to grow and flourish in the seasons yet to come. Winter wraps the English countryside in its cold embrace once again. The fields lie dormant under frost and occasional snow, the trees stand bare against grey skies, and the short days limit the hours of productive outdoor labour. For Victorian farm workers, winter has always been the season of greatest hardship: reduced work, lower wages, increased illness, and the constant struggle to keep warm in inadequate housing. Yet this particular winter feels somehow different. Gathered around your small hearth fire, your family seems more resilient than in previous years. The slight increase in harvest wages, combined with your wife's careful management, has meant slightly better preparation for the lean months. There's a modest store of potatoes in the cool, dark space beneath the stairs. Onions hang from the ceiling beams. Salted meat from the autumn pig slaughter provides occasional protein. The blankets on the beds have been supplemented with an additional quilt purchased second-hand from a household in the village that has moved away. These small improvements in material circumstances reflect larger changes gradually taking shape in rural society. The Agricultural Labourers' Union, despite fierce opposition from farmers and landowners, has achieved modest success in raising wages and improving conditions in some districts. The union's very existence has shifted the terms of engagement between agricultural labourers and those who employ them, introducing concepts like collective bargaining and workers' rights into relationships previously defined almost entirely by deference and paternalism. Your own involvement with the union has deepened over the months since you first attended that meeting at the Crown Inn. Initially cautious, you've become more active as fears of immediate reprisal have proven largely unfounded. The local branch meets regularly, discussing not only wages and working conditions, but also housing, education, and the possibility of cooperative purchasing arrangements to reduce the cost of necessities for labouring families. These meetings serve multiple purposes beyond their stated agenda. They provide rare opportunities for agricultural workers to gather and speak freely, away from the watchful eyes of employers and landowners. They create space for the exchange of information, about which farmers pay fairly, which are harsh taskmasters, where mechanisation is advancing most rapidly, what alternatives might exist to traditional farm labour. Perhaps most importantly, they nurture a growing sense of collective identity and purpose among workers historically characterized by isolation and political passivity. The winter passes with its usual challenges, but without catastrophe for your family. There is illness. Your youngest daughter develops a chest infection that causes anxious nights of laboured breathing and feverish tossing, but she recovers with the help of herbal remedies prepared by your wife and a syrup recommended by the farmer's wife, who takes an interest in the welfare of labourers' children. There are days without work when weather makes outdoor labour impossible, but the union's modest hardship fund provides just enough to prevent total destitution during these periods. By early spring, as the first snowdrops push through the cold earth and birdsong grows more varied and insistent at dawn, a letter arrives that marks another significant change in your family's circumstances. Your oldest daughter, now 16 and in domestic service in the market town, has been offered a position in London with the family of a merchant who maintains both town and country residences. The wages are substantially higher than her current earnings, though the work will be no less demanding and the separation from family far greater. The decision is difficult. London represents both opportunity and danger for a young woman raised in rural simplicity. The higher wages would make a substantial difference to the family's circumstances, but the distance means she would likely return home only rarely. Perhaps once a year at most. After much discussion around the cottage hearth, it's agreed that she should accept, recognising that the additional income might eventually help younger siblings find opportunities beyond agricultural labour or domestic service. This decision, made in your humble cottage but mirrored in thousands of similar dwellings across rural England, is part of a larger pattern reshaping the Victorian countryside. Rural depopulation accelerates in the latter part of the 19th century as agricultural workers and their children increasingly seek better opportunities in towns and cities or even in the expanding colonies overseas. The traditional stability of rural communities, where families remained in the same locality for generations, gives way to greater mobility and dispersal. The causes are complex and interconnected. Mechanisation continues to reduce the need for agricultural labour, with steam-powered threshing machines, mechanical reapers and seed drills performing work previously done by human hands. Changes in farming practices favour larger, more specialised operations over the mixed farming that once provided varied employment throughout the year. Economic depression in agriculture, marked by falling prices for farm products, squeezes farmers who in turn seek to reduce labour costs. Against this backdrop of economic pressure, the lure of urban employment becomes increasingly compelling. Factory work, though often dangerous and demanding, typically offers higher wages than agricultural labour. Domestic service in towns and cities provides young women with slightly better conditions and pay than similar positions in rural households. The expanding railway network makes such opportunities more accessible, connecting formerly isolated rural communities to regional centres and ultimately to London, that great magnet for ambitious youth from every corner of the kingdom. Your own children exemplify these changing patterns of rural life. The oldest son continues in farm service, having developed specialised skills as a shepherd that provide somewhat greater security and status than general agricultural labour. The oldest daughter departs for London, sending home letters describing the wonders and terrors of the great city, along with postal orders representing a portion of her wages. The younger children remain at home for now, helping with cottage industries and garden cultivation, while attending school more regularly than their older siblings ever could. Education represents another profound change, gradually transforming rural society. The Education Act of 1870 established the principle of education for all children, though implementation remains uneven, particularly in rural areas where child labour is economically essential to poor families. Yet even in your remote village, a school board has been established, and attendance, while still not universal, has improved significantly from your own childhood, when formal education was a luxury few labouring families could afford. Your younger children attend school irregularly, their education frequently interrupted by the demands of seasonal labour or domestic necessity, but they attend nonetheless, gaining literacy and numeracy that will provide options unavailable to previous generations. They bring home books from the small school library, reading aloud by candlelight in the evening hours, opening windows onto worlds beyond the bounded horizon of the agricultural village. As spring advances into summer, the eternal cycle of agricultural labour continues. The fields are ploughed and planted, crops tended through their growing season, hay harvested from meadows heavy with summer growth. You work alongside the machines that increasingly define modern farming, not just as their antagonist, but sometimes as their operator. The farmer, recognizing your reliability and adaptability, has trained you to handle some of the newer equipment, providing a measure of security in an increasingly precarious rural labor market. This accommodation with technological change is pragmatic rather than enthusiastic. You understand that opposing mechanization is ultimately futile, like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. Better to adapt, to find ways to work with the new methods, while continuing to advocate through the union for fair wages and conditions regardless of how the work is performed. It's a position that balances realism about unstoppable change with commitment to basic principles of justice and dignity for working people. The summer harvest brings its usual intensity of labour, but also its temporary abundance. The farmer, pressured by the union's collective bargaining, pays slightly better harvest wages than in previous years. The harvest home celebration maintains its traditional forms, though with subtle changes that reflect shifting social relationships. There's slightly less deference shown to the squire and farmer, slightly more assertion of worth and dignity by the labourers whose skill and effort have brought the crop safely in. Autumn follows with its own labours and rhythms. The land is prepared for winter crops, buildings repaired before winter weather tests their integrity, animals moved to winter quarters or slaughtered for meat that will sustain families through the lean months ahead. The cycle continues, as it has for centuries, but with differences both subtle and significant from the patterns of previous generations. One such difference becomes apparent as the local parliamentary election approaches. The Reform Acts of 1867 and 1884 have gradually extended voting rights to include agricultural labourers who meet certain property qualifications. While many still lack the franchise, a significant number now have at least theoretical political voice. The reality of exercising that voice remains complicated by economic dependency and the very real fear of displeasing powerful local figures who control employment and housing. The union branch discusses the election extensively, weighing the positions of various candidates on issues affecting agricultural workers, from game laws that criminalise traditional subsistence hunting to education policies that might benefit labourers' children. The discussions are remarkably sophisticated for men with limited formal education, demonstrating a clear understanding of how apparently distant political decisions directly impact their daily lives and future prospects. You cast your vote with careful deliberation, walking to the polling station with several fellow union members, drawing strength from collective action even in this most individual of political acts. The ballot is secret, but your presence at the polls is not, marking you as someone willing to exercise newly acquired rights regardless of potential social consequences. It's a small act of civil courage, one of many that gradually transform the relationship between agricultural workers and the broader society that has historically marginalised them. As winter approaches once more, your family gathers for a rare celebration. Your oldest daughter has returned briefly from London, bringing gifts purchased with her city wages, warm woolen stockings for the younger children, a shawl for your wife, a pipe and tobacco for you. More significantly, she brings news that she's secured a position for your second daughter, now 14, in the same London household. The two will share a small attic room, the older teaching the younger the intricacies of domestic service in a prosperous urban home. There's joy in the reunion, but also a poignant awareness of the family's gradual dispersal. The pattern repeats across rural England as economic necessity drives the children of agricultural labourers toward wider horizons. Villages that once contained generations of the same families now see their young people depart in increasing numbers, drawn by the economic gravity of urban centres or the promise of new beginnings in distant colonies. This diaspora transforms not only the demographics of rural communities, but also their cultural and political character. Those who leave carry with them experiences and perspectives shaped by rural life. Those who return, even temporarily, bring back ideas and expectations influenced by urban existence. The formerly sharp distinction between rural and urban consciousness begins to blur, with agricultural workers increasingly understanding their situation not as a separate and immutable condition, but as part of larger patterns of labour, capital and power reshaping Victorian society as a whole. For your family, these changes manifest in both material and ideological forms. The cottage interior reflects modest improvements in circumstances, a small shelf of books where none existed before, slightly better clothing, the occasional luxury like tea or sugar, but the more profound change is in outlook, in the growing conviction that conditions of life are not divinely ordained or immutably fixed, but are subject to improvement through collective effort and gradual reform. This perspective, nurtured by union participation, wider access to education and information, and increased contact with urban working-class movements, represents a significant departure from the fatalism and deference that characterized agricultural labor relations in previous generations. It doesn't eliminate the very real constraints of economic necessity or the substantial power differential between labourers and those who control land and capital, but it creates space for agency, for the assertion of dignity and rights, for the gradual improvement of conditions previously accepted as unalterable. As the Victorian era enters its final decade, these changes accelerate and deepen. Agricultural depression continues to transform rural economics, with falling commodity prices squeezing farm incomes and indirectly affecting agricultural wages. Mechanisation advances further, with steam and eventually internal combustion engines gradually replacing horse and human power for many farming tasks. Rural depopulation intensifies, leaving some villages with significantly reduced and ageing populations. Yet, agricultural labourers' organisations persist despite these challenges, evolving from the initial union structures to include cooperative societies, friendly societies providing rudimentary insurance against illness or injury, and rural branches of broader political movements advocating for working-class interests. The isolated, inarticulate, politically passive farm worker of early Victorian stereotype gives way to a more connected, more vocal, more organised participant in the national conversation about labour, rights and the distribution of resources. Your own experience mirrors these broader patterns. As you enter late middle age, your body bearing the marks of decades of physical labour in all weathers, you find yourself increasingly respected in the community, not just for your agricultural skills, but for your role in the union and other local organisations. Younger workers seek your advice on dealing with employers, on navigating the changing landscape of rural employment, on balancing necessary accommodation to economic realities with principled advocacy for fair treatment. Your children's trajectories reflect the diversifying opportunities of late Victorian society. The oldest son has become head shepherd on a substantial estate, a position of relative security and status within the agricultural hierarchy. Several daughters have established themselves in domestic service in London, sending home money that helps support younger siblings and aging parents. One son has joined the army, sending letters from distant parts of the empire. The youngest children, benefiting from better education than their older siblings, have found positions as shop assistants and clerical workers in the market town, occupations that would have seemed unattainable to previous generations of agricultural labourers' offspring. These diverse paths represent both success and loss. Success in finding opportunities beyond the limited horizons of traditional rural labour. Loss in the dispersal of family and community ties that once provided security and identity. It's a pattern repeated across rural England as the agricultural workforce shrinks and rural society increasingly consists of those who own or manage land rather than those who work it directly. Yet the contributions of agricultural labourers to Victorian society remain immeasurable, if often unacknowledged. Their labour has fed a nation through decades of profound transformation, from a predominantly rural economy to an industrial and imperial power. Their children have staffed factories, shops, offices and armies, providing the human capital for Britain's economic and political expansion. Their struggles for better wages and conditions have contributed to broader movements for social reform, challenging inequalities inherited from earlier eras and establishing principles of workers' rights that benefit all sectors of the economy. As the 19th century draws to a close, these changes continue to reshape the countryside and the lives of those who work its fields. The path of progress is neither straight nor unbroken, with advances in some areas offset by new challenges in others. Agricultural wages improve somewhat in absolute terms, but remain low relative to other occupations. Housing conditions see modest enhancements through rural housing legislation, though implementation is inconsistent. Educational opportunities expand, but often remain practically inaccessible to the poorest rural families. In your own cottage, preparing for another winter as the days shorten and the first frosts silver the morning fields, you reflect on the changes witnessed over a lifetime spent following the plough. Your circumstances remain modest by middle-class standards, but represent significant improvement from the conditions of your youth. The cottage has been gradually improved, a proper floor replacing packed earth, glass windows replacing oiled paper, a small range supplementing the open hearth. Your diet, while still simple, includes more protein and fresh vegetables than in earlier years. Your youngest children can read and write with a facility you never achieved, opening possibilities you could scarcely imagine at their age. These material improvements parallel less tangible but equally significant changes in status and identity. You're no longer merely a pair of hands to be hired and dismissed at the convenience of farmer or landowner, but a citizen with rights, a union member with collective voice, a voter with at least nominal political representation. The deference expected of agricultural labourers in your youth has given way to a more measured respect based on mutual recognition of interdependent roles in food production and rural society. As you sit by the fire on a winter evening, perhaps reading a newspaper passed along from the village pub or listening to your youngest child practice reading from a school book, you embody both continuity and change in the long history of English rural labour. The skills of cultivation, the intimate knowledge of land and weather, the patient endurance of physical hardship, these connect you to countless generations of agricultural workers stretching back to medieval villains and beyond. But your participation in unions, your exercise of voting rights, your expectation that children deserve education and workers deserve fair treatment, these place you firmly in the modern world, taking shape as Victoria's long reign draws toward its close.